Hello, everyone. I'm Russ. Sorry about the confusion there. Some technical difficulties always seems to happen. Anyway, I need to start off by giving the usual disclaimers. Please put your phone on silent if you haven't already. There's a rating thing you can do on the email, I think. So I'm supposed to ask you before and after to give me a rating. Is it bad form to ask for 5 stars? I'm not sure. Maybe that's TripAdvisor. Anyway, please do all that. And we are starting a little bit late, but there might be some time for questions at the end, hopefully. So I'm here to tell you how to crack early access. We're going to crack it wide open. Or am I? Spoilers. Before that, let me take a quick step back and start with a little bit of background. Who am I? Why am I talking about these things? So I'm Russ Clarke is my name. I'm the co-founder, CEO and creative director at Payload Studios, a London-based independent startup that is now 10 years old. We are known for our open world sandbox vehicle builder called TerraTech that released into Steam Early Access in February of 2015, a long time ago now, and also the Tentacle Zone games co-working space and incubator that we run out of our office in Farringdon. So that's us. And there's TerraTech. We founded Payload Studios to make this game. It is, until very recently, the only game we shipped. It's in its 10th year now with a 3.5-year early access that we went through. So I suppose I should know something about early access. And it's on all of the major last generation consoles. I guess we can't call the Switch a last generation console quite yet. Maybe next year. Sometime we'll be saying that. But anyways, there's TerraTech, and it did pretty well. 1 million units. That was before we started doing any bundles or anything. So all, honest to goodness, paid for sales over a nearly 10-year lifespan and 4 platforms, but still. The Steam review reception has only gone up in its history by keeping the players happy. Look how happy they are, you can see. So that's TerraTech. Yeah, it's great. People love it. A big success for a debut game for a studio. And, it enabled us to build up our whole team and ethos on this living development model, which has worked great for us. There's some stats, concurrency over time, revenue. I've taken the numbers out, but the point about that is the consistency, really. This is, just about a decade of history. And you can see the other platforms sort of coming in with the revenues marked in the different colors over time. But, pretty good experience. And for reasons I'll get into, we decided to make another one. TerraTech Worlds is our successor, not a sequel, that we launched earlier this year in the spring. And yeah, TerraTech Worlds. There it is. It's better, right? Look at it, it's pretty. More detailed, more immersive, more feature-rich, more everything, really. It's TerraTech, but more. And here is some of the more. It's on Unreal Engine 5 instead of Unity. We added 6-player co-op, massive spherical planets, fully deformable terrain, water, detailed environments, all the things that we couldn't do the first time around, hampered by early choices and technical debt. So yeah, brilliant. TerraTech went better. So obviously, the launch also did better. Oh wait, no, it didn't. Yeah. So that's what happened this year when TerraTech Worlds came out. Now, full disclosure, I submitted the proposal for this talk before we shipped this game. So I'm not sure if I'm entirely qualified to be telling you how to crack early access at this point, but it's okay. It's okay. In true early access fashion, we will update the title of the talk to version 1.1, Surviving Early Access, which is, I guess survival is really the thing on everyone's mind in the games industry in these trying times. But certainly that's where we're at right now. Before I get into the whys and wherefores of what happened, I want to recap some history in a bit more detail. So, as I said, we built up Payload on the foundation of TerraTech's early access success. We defined a key methodology to our way of working on this model. We call it community-driven development. It's also called living development. It goes by various names, like Gandalf. And the formula is fairly simple. You want to be iterating rapidly, frequent updates, or at least regular updates. You want to be keeping everything transparent, engaging responsively with your players. I'm not going to cover this in too much detail because this isn't really new anymore. Early access and living development, these things have been around for quite a long time. In fact, I've covered this before myself. I don't think it was in this room, but at this conference some years ago. It's not new. There's lots of resources online everywhere about how to do this. What I really want to talk about today is what's changed about early access. But the fundamental principles, they still hold true. You want to talk about what you're doing, talk about what you're not doing, why you're doing this thing now and that thing next instead of the thing that the players have been campaigning for, and so on. And when things go wrong, which they will, you need to be transparent about that as well. And it's amazing, really, how much leeway you can get, how much support with this kind of responsiveness and this kind of honesty. But it is essential. You've got to keep those updates coming fast. You've got to make sure, or at least regularly, you've got to make sure players understand how and where the feedback that they've given you, which sometimes they consider as work that they're not being paid for, how that is incorporated so they will buy into the whole process. This is what early access was always supposed to be about. And overall, be a human. In this wonderful internet age, it's all too easy to forget when we're bashing out angry complaints or death threats, that there's a person receiving that on the other end who's going to have a really bad day when you tell them to crawl into a hole and die. So giving people human, reasonable responses, even when they're angry, is a really important thing to do. You can flip them in a heartbeat when they realize that they're talking to a human being and being listened to and taken seriously, which is what it's all about. So be transparent, be responsive, be human. This formula builds goodwill. It turns critics into supporters. It works. Or at least it did work in 2015. It was great for us. We avoided the risk of making something people didn't want to play because we were getting feedback early and steering based on it. That community energy that comes through this process, really carried us forward. Influencers bought into that. They got involved. We got a lot of coverage that way. TerraTech is the kind of game that's naturally suited for that sort of thing anyway. But best of all, it brought forward revenue from after launch to during development where it could fund us to go on, which has been absolutely crucial to us and many other early access games. We shipped the original TerraTech early access launch for the princely total of, it was just over 100,000 sterling, which is a ridiculous amount to release a video game for, even was in 2015. The actual full development budget to 1.0 launch, I can't even tell you, many millions, but that was spent over, mostly over the 3.5 years following the launch of the game from the revenue that we earned during early access. So, an amazing model. And what was really interesting to learn about through this process was that it is actually possible to generate stable long-term revenue using a living development model without any kind of microtransactions or any other sort of proper recurring revenue model, just by making your game. Yeah, we had a couple of cosmetic DLCs, nothing fancy, but basically mostly new sales, people buying the game for the first time. So this was a great situation. Life was good. But there was a problem. All of our resources essentially were required to keep the live development train rolling. We were making money, that was great, but all of it was just getting plowed straight back in to keep the living development going, because the way that works is that as long as the game is alive, new people can discover it, can find out about it. There's a thing with momentum to keep going. But when you're in this situation, you don't necessarily have very much visibility. It's a fairly hand-to-mouth existence, and there's no guarantee how long this can actually last, which feels like this. Meanwhile, we were, feeding the beast, keeping the train rolling. Various problems were mounting up. The code base is getting older and older. By this point, we're looking at a sort of 5-year-old game. new titles coming out were already sort of, putting it in the shade. Old decisions and technical debt were mounting up and trapping us, limiting what we could do. It was very hard work to do console updates across 4 platforms with 2 different forks of the code base to maintain, and very, very difficult to add anything new and exciting and do the things that the players wanted to do. And we were thinking to ourselves, wouldn't it be great to, be out of this situation, to have a bit more visibility of what was coming, to have a game like TerraTech that could support us, but would be easier to maintain and extend, closer to current quality standards, the quantity standards that players are starting to expect, next gen ready, that was back when the current gen was the next gen, and something that more than supports the studio rather than just about supporting the studio, so that we have spare resources to find the next thing. So we needed to do something, and coming up with a whole new IP we felt would be a huge gamble. But TerraTech is a thing that's working great. We understood it deeply. We thought there's lots more ground we can cover. So let's make a sequel, a successor, not a sequel, so that we can fix old issues, so that we have kind of a license to actually change things, because, there are things that we decided, I'm personally responsible for quite a few of them, that we decided would be a good idea at the time early on, which, really, really bit us later. A lot of technical stuff about the way the world was generated on the fly, making it very, very difficult to add any kind of multiplayer later, as I discovered to my cost, and design decisions that, were a bit short-sighted with hindsight. So a successor, informed by everything we've learned about how to make this game, how to make games, how to work as a team. We have to rebuild it anyway if we want to do new things. So this is a chance to take a step forward. So we started raising money aiming to enter production 2020. And here are some assumptions that we were making in this process. Obviously, when someone puts up a list of assumptions, these are the things which are all going to go horribly wrong. So foreshadowing. But yes, there you go, assumptions. Firstly, early access. It was great. It worked. So it will work again, right? Sure. Assumption B. We can make TerraTech better, or a better TerraTech, informed by everything we've learned. And this opportunity is a successor, not a sequel, gives us a license to reach out a bit beyond the bounds of what TerraTech used to be, and tap into some nearby overlapping popular gameplay genres that are doing very well, because it's already got elements like some elements of crafting and sort of survival light. It's got a bit of base building. It's got a little bit of automation. With a bit more work and some deeper sort of feature work, we could get into those genres and, expand the audience, bring in new players. And this will all help us with our goal of having a new game that more than supports the studio, because we've got more players out there, so that we've got bandwidth to, try and experiment with some other things. So yeah, assumption B. Assumption C, this is a classic. Obviously, I haven't bothered putting actual numbers here. It doesn't matter what they are. We've all been here probably. You make what seem like sensible, even conservative guesses, and then things happen. So let's look at what happened, starting with C. I'm going to do these in reverse order. Remember, we were fundraising in 2019 to start development in 2020. We actually ended up finalizing our deal in 2021 because legal stuff takes a while and things, can roll over past the holidays. But we basically closed the deal in 2020, and we were already scaling up and assigning our team. Remember what else happened in 2020? Yes, a global pandemic. Thanks very much, world. Yeah, so the first thing we had to do was really learn how to work again, Now, I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole of discussing the ins and outs of remote working. There's a lot that could be said, and there are very different perspectives. But clearly, having that imposed on you out of nowhere, literally overnight, is a massive, massive disruption in all sorts of ways. My experience of that transition, my experience of working in game development, I guess, is that there isn't really a substitute, and this is just based on the experiences I've had doing a lot of in-house development, for what I think of as the ambient communication of in-person work with people who are around each other all the time. You don't really understand what it is until you've lost it. And you don't even notice that straight away until sometime later. You're just trying to understand, why is everything taking longer than it seems like it ought to take, despite our best efforts? These kind of problems don't always surface in a straightforward way. Individuals may feel more productive. They're at their desk, they can focus, they're not being distracted all the time, they're comfortable. So it can be hard to understand and hard to see at first when the whole team is falling behind, because people are suddenly going off in different directions, decisions are falling through the cracks, it's hard to get alignment on how to do things, or things get mostly done but somehow not quite finished. And instead, when you realize these things are happening and you're trying to analyze them, other things tend to be identified, like, oh, the vision for the game isn't clear, or the design documents aren't good enough, or the plans keep changing. And those things might all be true. But the ambient communication that happens when people are around each other, sitting next to each other in the same space, walking past each other's screens, catching up over coffee, that is extremely good at catching small misalignments before they turn into these actual divergences that then, bite you later on. So that's my experience of, it took a while to really get a perspective on this, but of how things went wrong. And obviously, this is not meant to be a complete indictment of the whole idea of remote working. There are plenty of very effective teams that have always remote worked. Of course, this is a problem that you tend to walk into when you have been 5 days a week in the office, and then you're suddenly 0 days a week in the office, and then later on you're transitioning to an awkward, 2-day, 3-day hybrid split, or whatever it might be. So anyway, out of the rabbit hole, yes, it's incredibly disruptive. It's hard also to discuss this kind of thing quantifiably, because let's face it, small indie teams are really bad at tracking any kind of data on this kind of thing. Maybe big corporates have ways to know, earlier when this thing's going wrong. We just sort of start to notice that things aren't working so well at our scale, and then we figure it out later. And also, that kind of disruption gets obscured by other factors like growth. Because in larger teams, communication is just harder, and it throws up a lot of the same kind of problems as remote working, communication problems where people suddenly, don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. So scaling, in short, is hard. And it's extra hard, of course, when everyone is doing it, because the industry has decided this will be a great time to hire as many people as you can and inflate the costs of salaries as much as is necessary to get those people in. It's a very, very expensive and painful process. At Payload, we had to basically give double-digit, on average, pay rises across the company 3 years in a row. And it's not hard to see how that X years times Y people times Z cost assumption just got blown completely out of the water. So, so that's how that kind of thing can go. Assumption B, going in reverse order, remember. So the thesis for TerraTech Worlds was, as I covered, I guess, with all of our experience making and supporting TerraTech, now we can make the best TerraTech game ever and address all those past limitations. For example, the awkward and unpopular block limit that constrained you from building what you wanted on console, because, turns out to be able to get a game through console certification, it's not really allowed to crash because the player has built an infinitely large vehicle and run out of memory. So, you had to bolt on something and no one likes it. And, well, making a whole new game, a successor, not a sequel, gives you permission to change things like that and work that kind of limitation into the design from the word go, right? That's the elegant way to fix the problem. So we wanted to do all of that. We wanted to expand on the things that already worked, improving the core experience of building, connecting to those overlapping genres that I mentioned, some survival crafts, some automation, broaden the market. And, this whole successor thing I keep banging on about, hopefully allows us to avoid the expectation of a sort of straight-jacketed design continuity, that it's just the old game with some more stuff. That was the idea. The fourth point actually was the thing that when we were talking to people about this plan in advance, the fourth point was the one that most often people highlighted as a massive risk, rebuilding a new engine. Actually, that worked great. We have a fantastic new engine based on UE5, does everything we need, it's efficient, it's scalable, it looks awesome. The team got up to speed quickly. Yeah, that was great. Everybody rebuild your engine. It was awesome. But everything else was a huge struggle. Even, just building on an existing game, trying to reinvent parts of it while adding new stuff is a huge, huge thing to do. And, obviously you've probably been smiling to yourselves while I've been talking about tapping into other genres and, bringing different audiences together. Yes, ambitious. I think it is achievable, but obviously you're then risking you making 3 games at the same time instead of 1. A vehicle builder like TerraTech in our case, with exploration and base building like a Valheim or an Astroneer, with automation for machinery like a Satisfactory. Awesome. But the creative complexity of all of that obviously scales exponentially with the scope, because you've got more and more pieces that have to be combined with all the other pieces in the game, because this is a sandbox game about connecting different pieces together. The puzzle just gets bigger, and every individual has a smaller piece of that puzzle, because the communication overhead also scales exponentially with the team size, more people to talk. So it takes a huge amount of experiment and iteration to put these elements together well. But it is doable, and we can do that, right? Because early access, right? That's what you do. You go into early access, you figure things out as you go along, people buy into the process, and yeah, it's awesome. Assumption A, that we could do the same thing again. As a reminder, here is how Valve originally announced early access. The goal is to provide gamers with the chance to go behind the scenes and experience the development cycle firsthand. It was awesome, and it was like that, right? The players bought in, it was exciting, the influencers rode the wave, it was a real thing, and it worked very well. And I think for those teams that got into that cycle at the right time and then just kept going and built their community, it still works. Right? What doesn't work, I'm controversially going to say anymore, is launching a game into early access. I don't mean technically launching a game into the official early access process. I mean launching a game into this definition of early access. That's done. What early access means now is essentially a polished beta with some content held back. That's what players expect. And to be honest, this isn't brand new news. We had started to realize this well before our launch, but at this point, we were fairly committed. We had burned up most of our runway due to the other assumption failures I talked about. We'd bitten off this ambitious scope. We had to ship and hope that we could sell the old school concept of early access. So here's how that went. I don't know if you can read that, but within 24 hours, basically our review score had tanked, all of our launch momentum had bled away. And most of the review feedback split between these two key points. So what's gone wrong here? Obviously, it's a bit galling to see early access reviews that basically say, blah, this game isn't finished. But I'm not really using this to have a dig at entitled gamers or whatever. It's not their fault. The term genuinely has changed its meaning, and it's not unreasonable for them to react like that, I think. Before I get into that, the other main scope of feedback there was the not TerraTech 1 stuff. This was a bit of a gotcha, but as I mentioned, it was a successor, not a sequel. We had decided to fix some of these core issues, expand the scope of the game, and it made sense to market that as a successor. And it is possible to convince players to get a new title in a series that changes some things, if they understand the new direction, if they get it, and if they feel it. But when you're doing early access, you haven't necessarily figured all that out. So this, I guess, was a fumble on our part, that another one, that people were coming to this game, this unfinished early access in development game, seeing, well, it's not just TerraTech 1, they've taken some new ideas, but they're not quite there yet. They're not fully balanced. They're not fully explored. Some things need to change, need to evolve. Oh, I don't like it. That was where that came from. And like I say, I think that probably is possible, but not to go about it in the early access development way. So why doesn't early access mean early access anymore? The problem, in my view, is inflation of expectation. Does anyone here, I bet a few do, remember the indie apocalypse? Remember? Yeah. Oh, hands up! I love it. When we were talking about that, there were too many games. Discovery was becoming impossible. You know, indie development was in danger. The sky was going to fall on our heads. That was in 2015. I looked it up. That was in 2015 when we were talking about the indie apocalypse and all that. At that time, there were 4,000 games on Steam. Now, twice that number of games launch each month. Behold, the indie apocalypse is upon us. This issue right here, I think, is probably the core game discovery challenge of current times, at least for anyone in our sector. And it's not really what my talk is about. You know, many others are covering it, so I'm just going to explore how it affects early access expectations, but, you know, this is a killer. There are 100,000 games on Steam now. That is 25 times more than there were when we launched TerraTech 1. 25 times more games to theoretically be aware of if you're trying to find the games that, you know, you're most interested in playing. But my brain hasn't got 25 times bigger. It's definitely smaller. I personally can probably be aware of less than 10, even that's quite ambitious, upcoming game releases in a given month. That's maybe 0.1% of upcoming games that I can even hold in my brain. Obviously, this is impossible to filter, so I rely on other sources, reviews, influencers, even the traditional games press. They're still around, the charts, you know, lots of other sources, and they all combine to filter through the thousands of releases and theoretically let the cream rise to the top if they're doing a perfect job of it. But because I have this fixed capacity, this very small fixed capacity of awareness, I end up only paying attention to a smaller and smaller top percentage of the most promising games. There's plenty of games upcoming that are probably really good or really interesting, or maybe they aren't yet, but they will be once they've gone through a bit of early access. But even though I support that in principle, I'm never going to pay any attention to them because I don't have room in my mind. All I'm going to do is wait for the internet to tell me what are the most exciting games. And so the minimum bar of player expectations that sets the quality bar that they apply to everything else is defined by a fraction of a percentage point. And that's, yeah, expectation. This obviously creates an incredible pressure to deliver more and more quality, completeness, polish. Naturally, developers and publishers try to do this desperately, you know, trying to get a few more crumbs, a slightly bigger slice of the shrinking pie on the table. They have to, and obviously that just inflames the cycle and expectations increase further. I have another example of this I wanted to raise. Baldur's Gate 3, that was great, wasn't it? A fun thing happened after that came out. A developer who loved the game took to the internet to say, hey, this is great, but look, let's celebrate the amazing achievement that Larian have in creating this incredible experience, but let's not turn that into a stick to beat all other RPG developers with, because, you know, this is an exceptional thing. We shouldn't just, you know, punish anyone else who can't live up to it in the future. A reasonable point. You'd think that would be, you know, maybe quite persuasive. Nope. Nope. You don't deserve our money. I love that one. But what I find fascinating about all these responses, there were a lot more than that. You know, these people aren't bile spewing, frothing at the mouth, you know, internet denizens. They're not hurling abuse. They're giving a lecture on free market economics. And they're not wrong, actually, because ultimately that's the way it's going to work. The genie doesn't really go back in the bottle on this, not unless things for the games industry get much worse than they already are, which I suppose could happen. But you know, not unless there's some sort of real apocalypse and there's, you know, no games for a couple of years, and then maybe some expectations will be readjusted. But I don't think that's going to happen. I hope it's not going to happen. So this is why there's no going back to that original early access definition, unfortunately. Players won't accept it because they expect more. Maybe, in theory, there is some sort of upcoming new platform or environment that can be created to recapture this, but I doubt it. You know, while the last 12 months plus has been a terrible ordeal for the games industry, for players, what a time to be alive. So much incredible value from developers and publishers who are desperate to try and, you know, get any traction at all. We have been training players successively to expect the moon on a stick, and, you know, someone will give it to them, and then their expectations will be justified. So to wrap up, here is my recipe unlocked to survive the brave new world of modern early access. Firstly, expect to launch a solid, compelling game experience at its core at your launch. Even if you're going to launch in early access, treat it as a 1.0. You can hold back content, sure. Don't hold back too much. Again, the expectations are only going up, but make sure you're going out with something that's already compelling and quite balanced and polished. If you want to do some early on community-driven development, the sort that we like to do, great. It's awesome. It's a great way to evolve, you know, your ideas, to let your gameplay solidify. Just don't try to charge anyone any money for it. Keep your team minimal while you're in this process, if you're doing it, of figuring out the game. And only when you have answered basically every significant question about how that core game works, then staff up and head towards your early access launch, which is really a 1.0. But once you get to that point, those old principles of old school early access dev still apply perfectly post-launch. Be transparent, be responsive, be human. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for sitting through all that. I'm sorry again about the delayed start. I'm supposed to remind you to fill in your review form. 5 stars, 5. And I think we've maybe got time for 1 or 2 questions. 5 minutes for questions, yes. When you're putting your hand for a question, if you please wait for the microphone so that your question will be recorded. Hello.
Isn't this just Valve's fault? Fundamentally, the cost of publish on Steam is trivial. The difficulty of publishing a small game on Steam is trivial. The commoditization of the market has been reduced to you are either on Steam or you make no money on itch. There is no alternative platform, and when presented with evolving platforms, gamers are extremely, extremely loyal to Steam, from a 20-year market share of Valve being the main thing. Isn't this just Valve's fault? There's a problem in the marketplace.
Well, I'm sure there are things that could be improved about Steam. I don't credit Valve with inventing free market economics. And, you know, if players being too loyal to Steam is a problem, then is that Valve's fault for making something that people are super loyal to? I don't know. I mean, I don't doubt that there is more that they could do to try to tackle this problem. Actually, I'm entirely confident that they are racking their brains to think of anything they can do. But the fundamental problems at work here, I think, are with human psychology and mathematics. And I think they're very, very hard. I'm sure Valve would love to change the situation a bit. I honestly don't know what they could really do about it. But, you know, that's a huge topic in its own right. Anyone else? This is one here.
Similar vein of question, I suppose. I feel like maybe there's like an endemic of bad communication in games between gamers and game developers. Like, as a parallel, you wouldn't put a bunch of house buyers and a bunch of house builders in a room and talk to them at the same time and expect them to agree. But we seem to do that in games. And how do you manage that, especially if you're managing like comms during community-driven development? You
know, it's funny because it used to be that those things were kept quite separate, right? The developers were over here, the players were over here, the publishers were in the middle, keeping them apart, you know, owning the whole channel. And the exciting thing about this whole sort of revolution of early access was it helped with the trend, which was obviously already happening, of developers getting closer to the players. I mean, I personally think it's incredibly valuable and, you know, transformative to do it this way. But yeah, it's like two different species communicating. And it can work when each side has more of an awareness of what the other side is looking for, what they want, what they value. And that's something you get by doing it. That was our experience. Like I say, you see some pretty shocking things that are said to you or at you or about you, you know, in these various forums. But when you get on there and talk to them like a human, it's amazing how quickly that can evaporate. Obviously, there are ways to have better communication with opt-in channels such as Discord. You know, Discord has been great for us in the development of a new title. We can engage much more effectively for players, and when players are active on Discord, you know, they're really paying attention. They've made a commitment, but you've then got to be careful about listening too much to them, because things that they get after everything they've committed, the average Steam review leaver is not necessarily on the same page with. Was there time for one more? I think okay, 3 minutes.
Cheers.
Go ahead.
Thanks for the talk. Question about finding your community. Do you think that how and where you find a community for a new game has changed since 2015?
Gosh, yeah, that is hard. I mean, almost certainly yes. I would say because we were making a follow-up game, we were able to start with our existing community. And yeah, I think the process of, certainly it was a very different process for us. When we made the first game, you know, we had a rough demo, we were taking it to game shows and, you know, showing it to random people and standing behind them while they played it. We were putting a demo up on sites like free indie game download sites. We did a Kickstarter, you know. There were multiple phases before the initial launch where we had various ways of getting out to new segments of people, and that helped to seed the starting community. I don't know if probably in principle, those techniques work in the same way now, but I guess the specific channels have changed. Are we at time? One more, yes.
Hello. So TerraTech 1 has a lot of post-launch DLC that you folks brought out. Do you think with the changing player expectations that they need a feature-complete game in early access, does that mean you can no longer do DLC? Or do you still think that players are willing to accept DLC after they've already had a really polished early access and a load of free content in early access?
Yes, I think so. You know, when people love something, they're generally happy to pay money, not always, but they're often happy to pay money to get more of it.
What if they're not quite happy as your users are right now? Some of them aren't happy. Like, that's kind of the question. Like,
there are certainly ways to cause unhappiness with DLC. One of them, you know, a real no-no, is releasing DLC during early access. You know, we actually semi-accidentally did that with TerraTech 1. Long story, it wasn't really what it was. It was a leftover Kickstarter reward that we wanted to make available to other people, and it wasn't just a sort of more content pack. It was something else. I'm running out of time, so I have to stop. But yeah, that definitely is a red line. But I think the process works, and you know, once you've got a community built up around the game, if the game is good and they feel happy with the money they've spent on it, then offering them something else that they could spend money on if they want to get more of it is generally pretty uncontroversial. That's my take. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for all that, and enjoy the rest of the conference.